lead us in our conversation. Our first guest is Shannon Bream. Shannon Bream is a well-known broadcast journalist for Fox News. She currently serves as the host for Fox News at Night, an hour-long news program. Shannon is originally from Florida. She received her undergrad from Liberty, and she went on to get a law degree from Florida State University College of Law. After practicing law for several years, Shannon decided to take a different direction in regard to her career, and she went into broadcast journalism. She worked in Florida at a news station, in North Carolina, Washington, D.C., and finally she landed at Fox in 2007, where she's been since then. We're also joined today by Danielle Hensley. Danielle currently works at WCBD News 2 Charleston as a multimedia journalist. She served in her current role for about a year. And she's also a 2018 graduate of Charleston Southern University. And so our format today is for Danielle to interview Shannon, and then if we have time, we'll take questions from students. And so let me pray, and then we'll have our interview. Father, we're thankful, Lord, for this time that you give us, Lord, to look at this major cultural institution of the media from the perspective of a biblical worldview. Lord, we pray that you would use this time well to help us to think Christianly, to help us to think critically, to help us to be wise stewards, Lord, of the media that we consume during this presidential election cycle. We pray these things in Christ's name. Amen.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Hi, fellow CSU Buccaneers. My name is Danielle Hensley, like before mentioned. So excited to be back here on my original set, back where it all started for me, and I couldn't be more thrilled to be joined by the Shannon Bream. How are you doing today?
Danielle, I'm great. Thank you so much for inviting me. Great to be with you guys.
Oh, it's an awesome time to be here in Charleston. So excited to have you here with us. And this conversation, we're going to have a ton of time to talk about the media and the media's role in politics and the election. Obviously, we have a very big election coming up this year, the presidential election. Shannon, tell me, let's start off broad. How would you describe the media's role in election coverage? What do we have to offer to the public?
Well, this year is so different than any other election year that any of us have ever been involved with. It used to be a lot of time on the road, chasing the candidates around rallies and speeches and conventions. And it gets to the point where you could give the speech for the candidate, whoever he or she may be, because you've heard it so many times out there on the road. And this has been really different. I mean, we were on the road for Iowa, for the caucuses, and for New Hampshire for the primary, and everything came to a screeching halt across the world shortly after that. So normally we're out there where we can build more of a relationship with these candidates and spend time with them. They get to know us, they trust us to some level so that we can have pull-asides and little conversations with them. This year's so different because we do have a few folks out there, very socially distanced, very limited, covering the candidates and whatever events they may have, but so many of the events are virtual. That we're doing it at arm length, distance kind of, and it's a really different experience, I think, for everybody, for the candidates and certainly for the media trying to cover them too.
Yeah, talk about some of those challenges when you get to be right next to someone, following them day to day or week to week. You really get to know them and you get a sense of what they're running for, and it makes our job easier communicating that to the public. But now doing it this way, it's kind of harder to relay that information. What are some of the actual challenges you're facing in delivering accurate information for the public while socially distant, something none of us are used to?
Yeah, well, whatever the campaign is or whatever's going on Capitol Hill, we often find that you'll get the press statements, the talking points from the various campaigns or lawmakers on the Hill, and you always have to take that with a big grain of salt because no matter which side it is, they obviously have their best interests and their best sound bites and their best quotes and their best stats mapped out in the press materials that you give that they give you. So we always want to have a healthy dose of, I wouldn't say cynicism, but skepticism that you want to dig into the plans, the numbers, whatever they're giving you to see if it actually adds up as a journalist. So, we do get materials from them every day in that sense. But I think to a couple of our reporters that we have out there, specifically on the Biden campaign, we have Peter Ducey and Jackie Heinrich, who are the two brave souls that are out there with masks and social distancing that are spending time with the Biden campaign. And you can see with Peter that he's actually built a relationship with the former vice president, that they have chats, they have conversations where Mr. Biden trusts him. He'll take some of his questions occasionally. So it's really, there's no substitute for that relationship. So now the rest of us at Fox are very dependent on Jackie and on Peter to have that inside window in those conversations with Mr. Biden so that we can translate that back to our viewers. So they're really kind of doing a super heavy lift this time. There's not a giant press corps following both these candidates right now. We do have more access to the president. Many of us have gotten to know him and spend time with him through the campaign trail when it was an open feeding frenzy and not the socially distant situation it is now, and through his time in Washington as well. So I'd say as much as he likes to talk to the press, and he's going to have a press conference supposed to be starting right now, it's a little bit easier to have access to him than it is with the vice president trying to be careful with the virus. And the White House has the advantage of the president and everyone around him, and I've been part of this, that you get a COVID test when you're going to be there at the White House or possibly be around the president. So I know the Biden campaign has talked about having some of the same technology available to them, and I think it will enable them to get out more a little bit too.
As the press, we get to have these one-on-one conversations sometimes with these candidates, really get to know them, and then it's our job to relay that information. How would you say it is best for us as the press, as reporters, to make sure we are doing fair and equal coverage, which is so important, especially during a presidential election when people at home are trusting us to give them this kind of information for them to make a very big decision?
Yeah, it's a big responsibility, and we all have to take it seriously because we are that direct line a lot of times to people at home who that candidate may never visit their hometown or their local diner, certainly not in a year like this. So what we have to do is simply report the facts. As I said, when they give you materials, do your own numbers crunching and that kind of thing. But we have to maintain an awareness of what they've said in the past, compare current statements and promises against statements and promises in the past. We have to keep sort of a running catalog and be willing to call people out. And regardless of what any of our personal political ideologies are or where we stand on any issues, our viewers should never know that. We should leave them guessing. And I always find when I'm getting criticized by both sides, I must be doing my job well. If there are people on Twitter who are like, you're so in the tank for the president, you're taking the White House talking points every day, to why do you hate the president? You're so disrespectful and mean to him. I think people project a lot. So our responsibility is to crowd out that noise and just stick to the facts. And if the person that we think should be the winner in any particular race makes a stumble or tells a lie, we have to be willing to call that out and just report objectively and tell the truth as best we can in the moment.
I love that you brought that up because people have asked me when I'm out in the field getting interviews, so what do you think? Well, obviously, I have an opinion, of course, but it's my job, right, as the reporter to be unbiased and to be fair and to just report the facts, like you said, and let the viewer or the reader make up their own opinion. So it's interesting that you bring that up. What advice would you give to newer reporters like myself or to all of these Buccaneer students watching that going in? Of course, we have an opinion, but it's not our job to share those.
Yeah, and that's tricky. You have to bite your tongue if you're going to be in the news business a little bit. And listen, you're a human being. We all are, and we all have passions and opinions about things. And I keep that best with my family, with my husband, with, few trusted close friends. But you have to put that aside when you go out to do your job. And as I said, if you're getting criticized from all sides who think they see you taking a particular side, it's usually a lot of projection. And it was hard in the beginning. I mean, social media colors everything we do, not to respond to people. And I have some coworkers who will say, oh, you must have missed the report that actually said X, Y, Z. I find that engaging in fights on social media is not helpful. But if you are getting criticism across the board, along with plenty of praise, because honestly, for all the meanies out there on social media, there are plenty of people who are like, we love what you do. Thank you for your show. I always say it's good to not listen to any of the extremes. Like, don't believe the people who tell you you're the best thing since sliced bread. And don't listen to the people who say you're the worst person ever on television. We're all going to get that. So I think you just have to go in knowing you set aside your opinions for the day. And a lot of times you'll learn something new if you go out to cover a story. I mean, in local news, I covered everything from, local education budgets to subway crashes to, everything. I mean, there are multiple things to be learned in every story. And there are multiple viewpoints and witnesses and opinions. So I think it's giving voice to the contrasting opinions and trusting our viewers and our readers to be smart enough. We don't need to insult their intelligence by spoon feeding them what we think they should know. They are grown-ups and they can handle it, and they can read the news if they've tuned in. They can watch the news and take the information we give them. And the best source is straight from the candidate's mouth, and let them assess what they make of it.
So true. Would you say that's part of the code of ethics, if you will, for journalism and for us journalists, is just to deliver the facts? Like you said, we don't have to spoon feed them. You just give them the information and they'll do with it what they will.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, because I think people are smart, and sometimes they are underestimated. The average viewer out there, they run their own lives and their own checkbooks, and their kids and their small businesses. These are smart people. Americans are smart, industrious people. We have education from 3 years old. We have a system that is teaching people to think for themselves and be educated and to read and to research and discover. So I trust people that they are going to take the information for themselves. It's not my duty to sway their thinking. That's the last thing I should ever think about doing. It's just my duty to give them the information so that they can make their own decisions. And I do think it's a big ethical issue. And I think we all have to check ourselves. It's easy to look around the business now and see people who are blurring the line. You have to me, it's like, great, if you're going to be an analyst or a pundit or a commentator, make that clear. If you've worked for a candidate or have a connection to someone's campaign or have a dog in the fight, you should make that clear. But if you're going to choose to be a journalist and be in the news business, and none of us are perfect, but we should be endeavoring every day to just present the information, whether we think it's good or bad for what we personally are rooting for, and just to keep that personal bias or opinion out of it. And as I said, it's never our job to sway anyone. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's just to give them the facts.
So true. And when we're talking about publishing this information, like you said, we're giving them the facts. I think today's media, especially for election coverage, is very different than we've seen in the past with social media. Not everyone is turning on their TVs and tuning into the channel to see these debates or this coverage. They could just be going to Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. Social media is a very heavy platform for election coverage now. How do you think that that's changed from 2016 to now in 2020? The transformation that social media has made what election coverage is today.
Yeah, I don't think that you can overstate the difference that it's made. A lot of people think that President Trump wouldn't be the president had Twitter not existed in 2016. He was able to cut through all of the traditional media channels and go right to the people and say, hey, XYZ, you may love him or hate him for saying it, but it was unfiltered, and that's unlike anything we've seen before. Now people can get a lot of news from their Twitter feed, Instagram, whatever their choice is, Facebook, but you're not often getting the whole story. You'll get a snippet or a sound bite. I think if anything, it should be a jumping off place. Everyone has a phone and a camera in that phone now to capture a moment. I think context is important. We've seen a lot of the riots and the protests lately. For us, the best coverage is when we have a reporter on the ground, because they can tell us what they're hearing and seeing and share it with the audience. But sometimes you just get a video clip. And there's one out of Pittsburgh right now that's getting a ton of attention. And there are people who are outside the clip that's out there saying, hey, there was more to it. You should know what led up to that and what happened afterwards. So I think it's an enormous tool. It is greatly important. You can't overstate, like I said, the impact that it has on making people's impressions. But I think that we also have to, I don't want to say resist the urge to be lazy, because I think a lot of us follow things in our feeds that echo what we maybe personally believe. I try to follow all kinds of people all across the spectrum, all different media outlets, different candidates, different lawmakers, both sides of the aisle. So I'm not in an echo chamber. So social media is important, but I think we need to do the homework and the research outside of that, to go beyond those snippets and those funny viral moments to get the rest of the story.
So true. And such a good tip there of following multiple sources from all different angles, just to make sure you are getting the full picture. And kind of like you mentioned, you can see and hear and read a lot about on social media, but sometimes, like you said, it's not always credible. What advice would you give to our Buccaneers watching this of finding credible information and sources? Do you trust Facebook, or what's the next step?
I don't tend to put a ton of trust in what I find on social media. Only I see it as a starting point. Sometimes I'll see a thread there in a story and think, wow, can that really be true? That sounds super weird. And then you dig on your own to go and find the rest of it. I think that there are so many things that get spread among social media, again, that are sometimes conspiracy theories, sometimes things that are biased and not telling you the whole story. So that's never the ultimate source for me. But I, every morning, probably read a couple dozen websites and papers. When I'm in my normal office, which we're all kind of at home now, in my normal office, I have several TVs up on the wall, and they're all on different channels every day. I've got MS, CNN, CNBC, FBN, FNC. I really try to make sure that I'm watching everybody. Everybody will get different scoops and different parts of the story sometimes. So I think it's good to look at all kinds of different sources, whether they line up with what you think the story is or not. There's always something to be learned. And I think that from there, it's always our responsibility to fact check it. But I find that I get many more interesting viewpoints and angles on a story and things I wouldn't have found out if I was reading one or two or three of my favorite sources. I think it's much better to go beyond that and read things that, there's some websites I pull up each day and I'm like, wow, there's not a shred of positive news on this thing. The world is ending. This is terrible. But they have authors and pieces I'm not going to see anywhere else. And so let me wade through this and see what's legit and what is worthy of attention.
So true. So if anyone is watching this, taking it away, it is fact check, fact check, fact check. Always check your sources. Social media is very powerful, but also it can be a very powerful tool for us as journalists. I know my current job, our social media manager is always on us about that is how you share your stories. That is how such a large percentage of the population now gets their information. So you need to be where they are. Shannon, talk to us about being where they are. Talk to us about being on Twitter, being on Facebook, because it's also a great platform for us to share our stories and get that information, get that news out to the public.
Yeah, the truth is now, if I get some breaking news, I know I can put it out more quickly on Twitter than I can before I can get in front of a TV camera or get on the air live. I mean, it's just the truth. And with live streaming capabilities, you can take somebody where things are happening. And for me, I do a lot of coverage of the Supreme Court in addition to the show at night. And so in a normal time, a non-COVID, non-pandemic time, those are some of the best days for social media for me, because often there are big rallies, there are protests that are competing with each other. And to just be able to live stream it and take people there, that's where I tend to get the most interaction and response from viewers who will say, it's so cool to see you show us around and to hear the different people and the speakers, whether they're yelling, whether they're jostling, whatever's happening, whether they're peacefully, stating their claims, but protesting against each other. I think folks like to be behind the scenes. And so we try to give them that as much as we can. I can't go on the air and for 2 hours make people watch a feed of what's happening in front of the Supreme Court. But if I'm there and I can kind of narrate and take people through it and they can get a firsthand look to feel like they're there on the steps, I think it's such a gift that we have as reporters, whether you're on the scene of a train derailment or whatever it is. The fact that you can more quickly go on Twitter and get that news out there is a great asset and tool, but it's also, there should be a lot of caution, because we've all gotten tips or information that is so great. Sometimes you think, I gotta run with this is huge, I gotta get it out. I now resist that urge because, if it's something that seems too hard to believe, I mean, at least double source it, or have somebody who's willing to put their name on it. I think we have to be careful with anonymous sources. They are useful, they play a role, but I think that we have to be careful with that. And social media sometimes will, tickle that urge within us to be first and to get it out there. So it's an enormous tool, but one that we have to use very carefully.
So true. You want to be first. You want to be the first to report that breaking news, but it needs to be correct, because also you are building your own credibility. Hey, Shannon, can you share some insight on that, building your credibility, especially for these young Buccaneers, a young reporter, trying to build that reputation in news? What advice would you give to us about how to do that in the best way?
Well, I've learned some of these lessons the hard way. And so I would say you want to be accurate rather than first. Yes, your goal as a competitive journalist and for your media outlet is to be first with something, but you will damage your credibility. It will take a ding if you get out in front of something that's not correct or not ready for publication. So I've made that mistake, and I think it's important to be honest with your viewers or your followers, whatever it is, to say, you know what, we messed that up, and we take responsibility for that. Here's where we messed up, and here's how we won't do it again. It's really painful lesson to learn, but just don't have to go through it in the first place. And just learn from our mistakes, those of us who've made that mistake. And just trust me when I say that you want to be accurate rather than first. And the first will come. I mean, as you get more experience, you get solid sources, you get someone willing to go on the record with you, people that are reliable, things that you can directly cite. I mean, to me, the closer you can get to the original story is always better. So when something breaks in the court system, for me, I want that motion, I want that document, I want that brief. So the closer you can dig to the original source of information is always going to be the best. But I think credibility just comes with consistency. When your viewers or followers know, or your readers, that they can see over time that you have not led them wrong, that what you've said is proven out to be true, and that it's been consistent. I think sometimes it just takes time and consistency. That's the best tool. And when you do make a mistake, be willing to own it and just be honest.
Owning that mistake can sometimes be the hardest pill to swallow, but not only are we trying to build our credibility on social media, but taking us back to this election road, we have candidates on social media. And like you said, in 2016, the game changed with Trump being on Twitter and connecting directly with the country. Talk to us about the candidates using social media. How have you seen that change? And does that make our job harder or easier?
Yeah, I do think it makes it trickier for us because as a journalist, you don't want your full-time job to be fact-checking every single thing that comes out of a candidate's mouth, but it's kind of necessary. The social media platforms are really kind of split and all over the place on this. When are they going to flag something? When are they going to tag it as being inaccurate? When are they going to take it down? So that's really a job, I think, for the social media companies. If we know something is inaccurate, I do think we have a duty to make that clear. We also would note, though, that we don't cover every single thing that a candidate or the president tweets. It's impossible. I mean, they have such a megaphone with that platform. And sometimes it's just not worthy of a breaking news alert. I mean, not everything that they tweet out is newsworthy and needs to be covered at that moment, right as they tweet it out. A lot of the candidates out there, we know that they use social media experts, you know, people who are part of their campaign, who vet everything and you know, put together, edit the videos, and it's a very polished product. The president, I think, prides himself on not being polished, you know, misspelled words, whatever it is. I think he just feels like it makes him real, and that's what people who like him have connected with, the fact that he is so unfiltered. But we don't have an obligation to run with every tweet that comes out from the Biden or Trump camp. But we do have an obligation when we know something is false to state as such.
True. And it's interesting that you talk about these candidates. They have professional social media managers that are managing these social media accounts. They're not always the fingers behind that tweet, right? Actually saying those exact words, but we are, as a journalist, that is our Twitter, that is our Facebook post. We're the ones fact checking, posting it, writing the scripts. I think it's important for young journalists to understand how much work really goes into this job. You're not just getting on TV and reading a script. You're in charge of understanding that information. Tell us about some of that background work that it takes to get on camera, have credibility, and to report facts.
Well, a couple of things. Before I got into television, I thought, and my background is as a lawyer, I thought there were like three people. I thought, oh, there's the anchor, the reporter in front of the camera, there's somebody working the camera, and I guess somebody turns on microphones and lights. Like, hey, had no idea the giant team that you all work together and rely on each other to get 1 second of television on the air, from engineers to satellite operators to, you know, desk assistants. I mean, prompter operators. There are so many people. I just had no clue. I was a dummy. So for me to go into a studio for the first time and kind of see how it all came together, I was so impressed by this enormous team that's responsible for everything you do to get it on the air. Now, a lot of us now are have become more independent in the sense that we can go and shoot and edit and write things and get them on the web or get them out. But there's still a ton of production that goes into every single bit of what you use. and what you put together. I also think it's funny that I do an 11 o'clock show, and I'll have people who say like, what time do you go to work? Like 10? That you just go in and read everything off the prompter. I'm like, no, we are working all day, researching, booking guests, changing guests, researching what sound bites we're going to use, what the newest study is on COVID, what the new numbers are, what did the latest medical journals say. I mean, it's an all day thing. So I do sort of laugh when they say, oh, you go in at 10 o'clock, and just try to tell myself like, okay, that you were once that uninformed about what happened at TV. You also thought it took 3 people to do this. So I can't get onto other people, but there really is a ton of work. The writing that goes into it, the research, tracking down interviews, chasing a story, seeing if there's anything to it. There's a lot of work that goes into it, but I find it exceptionally rewarding, and it doesn't feel like a job to me 99% of the time.
It is very rewarding when you turn that story at the end of the day and you barely make it to show, right. And then you do when you see your product on television, and you're like, wow, I did that. And people to this day are shocked, especially at this local level. People are like, do you not have a cameraman? I'm like, right. That would be me. They're like, do you edit this? And I'm like, yep, I did that. We go from pitching the story all the way until it's on air, of course, with the help of an entire news station. It takes a village to get a TV show on air, but it takes a lot of work, as you are very aware. When it comes to researching and fact-checking, are there any sources, whether websites or books, that you use that you would recommend for all of us to look into to kind of up our ante and make sure we are doing the right thing on air?
Yeah, I think that, like I said, the closer you can get to the original sourcing of any story, whether it's you track down the parent who made the statement about how the school computers are terrible and they can't do remote learning, or you find the documents in the court ruling, or you go read through Discovery. I use a lot of my legal background. I'm super grateful that I have it, and it helps me with a lot of these stories because there are so many legal angles to what we do, whether we're covering politics or local county board meetings, whatever it is. Being able to go dig up the original documents is the best sourcing, trying to get to the person. Sometimes I'll read a story and say, that soundbite sounds weird if it's in print. That doesn't sound like what they would have said. And sometimes you get back to the original video and see it was spliced. That's not what they said. Or you find them, you track them down on the phone or DM them on Twitter, and they respond to you sometimes, and you find out that isn't the whole story. So I think as close as you can get to original sourcing, people, documents, whatever it is, that's the best advice. I also think you should force yourself to read all kinds of different websites, things that, or papers, things that come from, angles that you think like, wow, that's out there really, really far left or really far right, at least to keep in mind the conversation that people are having and what is influencing the conversation. Now, from there, you dig in to see what of it is legitimate. But I think having a wide, broad array of sources that you look to is at least a good starting point for digging into what sounds off to you and what sounds true, and that you can track down to be true.
Very true. And getting back to this election train, as a journalist yourself, covering these elections and everything that leads up to it, how do you prepare? What are the notes you take? What do you read and look into? How do you just mentally get ready to cover this national news?
I don't think we're ever not doing it. I think that there's stuff that comes in 24 hours a day. My team, because we're the back half of the day and we're live until midnight, we're picking up a lot of stuff that is breaking news for the morning crew when our show starts again at 4 a.m. and our team is back in for the early shows. Sometimes the guests that we've had on do break news, and we had Secretary Pompeo on with us last night talking about Russia and Iran and the troop drawdowns in Iraq and Afghanistan. So a lot of times what our show is doing is the breaking news for the next morning. So then when I get up, not at 4 a.m., not early, I'm looking to the morning shows to see what they're breaking for the rest of the day. So again, looking across several networks and media platforms is the best way to do that. If one of the candidates gives a speech that's a little bit different, if it's going to be an economic policy speech or a military or foreign policy speech, something that's not their usual stump speech, I'll make more time to listen to that and really take note if it's not their usual material they're cranking out. And I think I just think it's interesting to watch people, fellow journalists, I follow a lot of them on Twitter from all different media outlets too. They have different sources and scoops than I do. So a lot of times you'll see what they're doing and be able to run with it then to your own sources and say, like, can you vouch for this? Were you in the room? Is this what was said? So I think just exposing yourself to as much information as possible. I have done a presidential primary debate, which was probably the scariest professional thing I've ever done. That level of preparation was insane because then you go and for the candidates, you pull everything they've ever said of any importance on any topic and you just make a giant notebook and immerse yourself. I mean, there's nothing that substitutes just for homework and preparation. But to me, that's the one thing that takes the nerves away in my job. The more prepared I am, the less nervous I am. And if that means I got to spend 5 hours getting ready for a single interview, then I'm going to do it because you want to have your bases covered. And that's where you get better at fact checking in real time when you know everything that's been said on the topic as much as your human brain can handle. Preparation, I think, is the key.
There is so much to prepare for when you're covering something that large. But even if you're covering a local town council meeting, there is a lot of research that goes into that. And in politics and in news coverage, a lot of time there feels to be disproportionate coverage, if you will. One of the questions I see a lot on social media is there anything that can sway a news outlet's coverage? Whether that's money, whether that's advertisement, what would you say? And that's kind of a scary topic to talk about, but is that reality? Can a news outlet sway their coverage based on their own beliefs instead of following what we talked about earlier, being unbiased and giving only the facts?
Yeah, and this has been such an interesting conversation the last few years because television, since ratings have been available, has been driven by ratings. Those are ad dollars. There's a corporation that is looking at the balance sheet. So you know those things are part of the reality, part of the conversation. But we've heard media outlets in the last few years, some of them step up and say, we're not going to be about ratings as much anymore. We're going to be about the stories that we think are important. Most media outlets do not have the luxury of just saying, I'm not going to pay attention to ratings at all. You want to make sure that you're serving your viewers and they see some value in what you're doing and that the product is good. So I think you've got to look at all those things, but I've never in my experience at any place that I've worked had a boss say to me, you can't do that story because it won't rate, or you should do this story because it will rate, or we're telling you what story you have to do. So that's refreshing. But the fact is I know somewhere at the end of the line, there is a corporate bean counter who is looking at how the different shows do, how the ad dollars do, and somebody is factoring that in somewhere. I think it's, it's an interesting conversation to have because you have to make sure that you're offering something that is valuable to the viewers that they're connecting with. And our goal is to do that in a way that's entertaining and informative and hopefully keeps their eyeballs tuned on us.
Absolutely. And I want to encourage everyone that's tuned in and watching this to start submitting questions because we would love to answer that from live stream. Any questions that you've had on any topics that we've covered or anything we haven't covered, send them in. We're going to keep chatting, but send in your questions so we can answer any that you might have. Tell me, Shannon, when it comes to news and coverage, whether that election or anything, it is our job to be unbiased. But when it is our personal lives, I know we both identify as believers of Christ, and sometimes that line can get blurry of having your own beliefs and wanting to share that, but also being professional. How have you succeeded and gone this far in your career and balanced that?
For me, it's the first thing every day. It's putting on my armor because especially this year, there have been times it's hard to get out of bed, I'm sure for all of us, when the early days of COVID, when everything went silent, we all felt trapped at home. We were scared. We didn't know what was happening. The markets were crashing. I mean, it was very frightening. And so I've always been a person who my faith is the number one thing. That's how I start my day. But sometimes I would get busy. I'm like, I'm going to go for a run first. I'm going to answer these emails first. And now one of the good silver linings of this year is that it has forced me back to that. Like, nope, you're going to get out of bed. And before you read an email or answer a text, those people can wait. You are going to spend time with the Lord and you're going to pray. You're going to seek him. You're going to read. And for me, that's the start to the day. Without that, I'm kind of just flying by emotion and not tethered to truth and anchored to something that is bigger than all of this. So for me, that's the first thing every day. And I just strive to spend the time there because I know it's comforting to know that there is someone else in charge of all of this. I'm not. There is someone who has purpose in all of this and sees us and knows what's happening. Nothing that's happening here as bad as 2020 has been, if it's even worse in 2021, that the Lord doesn't know about and hasn't foreseen. So I take great comfort in that. And I do have to, listen, preach to myself and do a reset when I get overwhelmed by what we're reporting and say, listen, it's all in his hands. Nothing's a surprise. And there's purpose in this, even when it feels terrible. I think there's purpose in pain and in struggle. And a lot of times it brings us closer to him. So there are times when it feels very heavy, what we're doing, but I kind of just, try to remember that cast your cares on him, for he cares for you, and to remember that he wants to carry the burden. And so I don't need to try to be the savior of everything and try to solve it by carrying it all myself. So listen, I on my social media will post verses or excerpts from books or devotions that are meaningful to me. I don't want to hit anybody over the head with it, but I'm also not going to hide who I am. And so I love hearing back from people who say, like, you don't know, I needed this verse today. It fits my situation perfectly. And like, I know the Lord knows, I don't. But I try to share that way, and I'm open about my faith. And the funny thing is, even during COVID, we did a lot of good news. I know it's not over, but in the heat of it, we did a lot of good news stories where we would talk about how a neighbor had started, food service for the elderly people. They did all their grocery shopping for them or whatever it was. And I actually, my friend Janice Dean, who is our meteorologist on Fox and Friends, she's been very personally impacted by this because both her in-laws died of COVID within like 10 days when this first started. They were in nursing and assisted living facilities. So she's really struggled. And she came on the show and we're talking about it. And she said, I want when I come on the show tonight, if you will put up the verse that you sent me when I was struggling so much. And I thought, okay, we're going to do this and see if anybody has a problem with it. And I mean, the reaction was fantastic. I think people are hurting and they're looking, whether they're a Christian or not, they're looking for some source of peace right now. And I feel like this is the time that we can offer them that and some comfort and point them to our source of comfort.
I love that boldness of sharing your faith, even when it might be scary and you don't know the reaction you're going to get. If you don't mind sharing something personal, has there ever been a story, whether it was even during your local days, that you just didn't feel comfortable with because you felt like it might have been against those Christian beliefs? And how did you handle that?
I feel like I've been pretty fortunate that I've not had to censor myself or to walk away from a story. I mean, I will say when I think, hey, listen, do we need to use that salacious piece of video for the story? It may be about XYZ, but we don't need to show a strip club. There are editorial decisions that thankfully I'm in a position now where I can say, no, we're not going to do that. I think I've always made clear to people where I stand, and I haven't been put in a situation that has felt like I've had to compromise. I think sometimes I have to be very careful in the words that I use in covering something to stay neutral as possible when it is something that may impact my religious faith. I'm not ever going to say anything or do anything against my faith because I know, listen, even if it, meant me costing my job, I know the Lord has purpose in that. And I'm human in that I say that would be frightening for me and I don't want that to happen, but I ask him for courage and he knows my heart. So I just have to be truthful about that. I mean, if anything, I find that converse has been true the last few years and that I'm able to do stories that other people are uncomfortable with or don't want to do. A few years back, I did the story of Kermit Gosnell, the abortion doctor in Philadelphia, who we covered his trial for a month in Philadelphia. And every day we'd be out there and people would say, what are you doing here? These are people who live in Philadelphia. We'd be outside the courthouse and what are you guys covering? What are the TV crews here? And often we were the only TV crew there. And I'd say, well, this doctor who, performs abortions, there were children, there were babies that were born alive, that he then took their lives. And they had no idea. These are people in Philadelphia where this story had been unfolding for months who knew nothing about it. And I thought, you know what? A lot of people are uncomfortable with us putting this information on the air. Some of the graphic testimony from the trial was really tough. But I'm thankful that there were shows, and I was a reporter then, anchors who would put that story on their show just because we knew it was important. And it was something a lot of people wanted to look away from because it was super uncomfortable. It was hard to report on. And that's the only story that I've actually had nightmares about, where I would get to the end of the day and feel like, yikes, I can't sleep. This is so bad. But I'm really honored that I was able to do it and that I worked for a network that was willing to cover it.
You've shared so much good advice today. Is there any tips that you've learned along your journey in your career that you think would be good for us young Buccaneers to know and to kind of hold on to as we start ours?
Honestly, I would say do not take no for an answer. It will help you in so many ways. It helped me in getting my first internship when I was a lawyer, and people are like, "What are you doing?" And I was, almost 30 doing my first internship in a newsroom, and people called me grandma intern. And, I had so many people say no to me just for me to get that one internship. And then for each job that I fought for, each interview, when you chase people down the street, or I call a congressman who doesn't want to go on camera, I mean, don't take no for an answer. I got fired from my first TV job by a boss who said I would never make it, and I was terrible and the worst person he'd ever seen on TV. That was humiliating, but it did.
You showed him, right? You showed him.
Well, it gave me a good dose of humility, which is good to have in this business, and to remember that, listen, it's very subjective. You may have a boss who, my boss that gave me that first chance left the station, and the new guy thought I was terrible. So listen, it's okay if you get fired. It's okay if people tell you no 1,000 times. You need one yes, one person who believes in you, and just keep plugging. It can be very discouraging. But if you've got a passion for this and you have a path, just keep moving.
That's so good. I think we have our first question, or a few questions here. Okay, here we go. When does a news story move from reporting to commentary? Wow. The first question.
Yeah, I think anytime you start to inject your personal opinion or personal critique of someone, I think that's where you cross the line. It's like I said, it's gotten so blurred these days. We all have to be very careful. It's fine to criticize someone's plan, like, oh, the numbers don't add up, that military budget won't work, or this bill that they're passing doesn't have a funding mechanism that's going to make sense. I think doing some analysis is fine, but I think when you start to say things that are personal in nature, like, I hope this person loses, or this person better win, or it's over for the country. I mean, when you start to inject personal feelings into something, I think you move from research and analysis and journalism into, this is my opinion and this is what I think of the situation personally and this is what should happen. When you find yourselves getting away from the facts and getting anywhere near your emotions, that's a good sign that you probably need to stop and think about it.
So true. And I liked what you said earlier, that if you're getting hate on both sides, if you will, you're doing your job right, but also you are building credibility. You reporting the facts. I've actually had a person I interviewed one time for a story, getting both sides, emailed me and was like, you know what, you covered that story fully with both sides, and like, that's appreciated, and you didn't put your input, and you just let the viewer take from it what you will. It can be hard sometimes, especially in recent days. We've had a lot of big stories to cover that everyone, you're human, you're going to have an opinion on. But like you said, being unbiased, reporting those facts, you might get a little hate from both sides, but you're also really building that credibility with the viewers and knowing people can trust you, right?
And a lot of times we have to do that with lawmakers too. We invite Democrats on our show all the time, and many of them immediately hear it's Fox and say no thanks. But there's some that we've just had to spend years building a relationship with. They come on the show and they know they're treated fairly. There's no gotcha or unexpected bomb that we drop on them. We legitimately want viewers to hear their side of a story, a debate on a bill or judicial nominee. I think it's much more interesting to viewers and much more helpful to include as many voices as we can. And so some of them are very wary of us, but it takes time to build a relationship. And that's true with, somebody in city council or the mayor or whoever it is. They may just be afraid of the media in general. They're not going to get a fair shake, that something's going to be clipped or taken out of context. So it takes time to build relationships. But when people know that they can trust you and they'll be treated fairly, even if you have an opposing viewpoint on it, they have to stand up for themselves. If they feel like it was refereed fairly, they'll come back.
Absolutely. I love that point. And that's a really good one to take away, is relationships. This job is all about relationships and building trust. We have another question. I'm going to read it to you. I am concerned that I don't have a variety of news streams limited to streaming services. Is this a legit concern? How do I make sure I'm informed as possible? Great question.
I feel like even if you have a limited access to, a lot of people don't have cable anymore and not everything streams, or you have to sign up for all kinds of expensive services. Honestly, I feel like there's so much available online that you can find a lot of information there. Now, I felt like there were some newspapers that I needed to go ahead and spend the money to subscribe to them so I'd have access to everything on their websites. For some of them, it's not cheap, but I think it's a good investment because I feel like there are sources out there that I need to have access to. So I will fork over the cash for, 3 or 4 of them that I think are subscription only, a lot of their materials, but worthwhile because they're such a big voice in the conversation. But there's so many free websites online. I mean, obviously foxnews.com is a great one. But we give you options to, watch, newsmaker interviews. You can read all kinds of printed news or online news. But I found that there are a lot of sources that I can use that I can get enough information without having to hit the paywall on a number of those websites. And I follow a lot of political ones, being here in DC, the Federalist, The Hill, Politico. Of course, the other ones that you do have to pay for a little bit, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. But, Daily Caller, Daily Wire, Town Hall, there are sources all over the spectrum. Some of them give you plenty of access without having to hit that paywall, and others you'll have to make a decision about whether it's such a big voice in the news business that it might be worth paying.
Absolutely. And for these college students, it was me not too long ago. Take advantage of your local stations. I might plug like you plugged, but those websites are free. Tuning into that is free. You can watch the live actual show from Twitter and straight from the website. So you don't have to have a TV or TV service to actually watch the news. And trust me, I used to not be about local news, but you actually do learn so much. And not only will you learn about what's going on in your community, but you're learning national and state news. So if you are on a budget, like any college student is, take advantage of those until you can kind of rack up some extra pennies and really invest in those news streams like you're mentioning. Next question. As a Christian, has any politician impressed you as a man or woman of Christian character? And what do you think CSU's alum Senator Tim Scott's chances would be as a presidential candidate? I love Senator Tim Scott. He's a great man. What a buck. What a buccaneer.
Yeah, and you know what? You never know with politicians because they're so good, so many of them at the whole act. So until you can talk with them personally and spend some time with them, I would say Senator Scott is one of those really genuine people. If you guys have spent time with him, you know that. I think he comes from a place of what you see is what you get with him. There's not a lot of political crafting and consultants shaping him. I mean, he's who he is. And I think there's so much buzz around him for 2024. He would definitely be, I think, on the list of 10 or 15 serious contenders to run. I've always been impressed with him personally when I've had conversations with him. I will say that there are a lot of politicians out there who tweet out Bible verses and do that kind of thing. And when I talk to a member who I know is, I believe to be, a solid believer and genuine about their faith, they always talk to me about these bipartisan Bible studies that they have on the Hill. Where they have members from across the aisle and they sit together and they do Bible study once a week. And I think that's one of the most wonderful things I've ever heard on Capitol Hill, because they can disagree about a lot of things. But if you're united in Christ, I think that overcomes so much. And at least they can have friendships and conversations and join each other on projects where they can find common ground. So that actually does happen on the Hill for sure. I would say that Marco Rubio, 4 years ago when we were out on the trail more, I got to see his faith a little bit more personally too. And he is somebody who will tweet out Bible verses and talk openly about his faith. But he's somebody, in having conversations with him and seeing him on a more personal level, he was one of those that I felt like it truly is where he came from. And there are many, like I said, folks on both sides of the aisle who take the time to study God's word together and to pray. And we should all be doing that for our members on the Hill, regardless of party. They need a lot of prayer right now as they try to wade through some really heavy stuff.
Absolutely. I think that definitely serves as some encouragement. If you are young, still in college, looking to get into this business, I know when I started, especially starting in news, it kind of is scary thinking that you're going in as maybe the only Christian. I think that can serve as encouragement that you're not the only one, whether it's in politics or news or sports, whatever it is that you're going into, that don't be scared. There's other people in there that will support you and share in those beliefs, all while you are all being unbiased in your news coverage. Shannon, thank you so much for coming virtually here to CSU and sharing all of your knowledge, wisdom, experience. It was so good to have you here. CSU Buccaneers, It was great for me to be back here on my original set, getting to chat with you guys. Politics, elections, news coverage, and media is so important. And we definitely have a big year coming up. So make sure that you are tuning in to all of this coverage, taking notes. The best thing you can do right now is to learn and to grow and to see and what other people are doing. Tune into Shannon's show and see what a professional she is and how she covers some of this. Pay attention to questions that are being asked and responses and how they're said. Guys, thank you so much for joining. Shannon, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure being here with you today. Guys, thank you so much. Y'all have a great weekend. God bless you guys.